Can you hear me now?
People Mechanics podcast. I'm John Peachy, Chief People Mechanic here at the Think Farm. Welcome along to the podcast today. My guest, in one sense, it's unfortunate that she's here because the topic that she has become expert in is a topic that none of us really want to talk about, but desperately need to talk about. Some of the major reports from the OECD mark us as particularly bad in workplace culture, workplace bullying, schoolyard bullying. These are just terrible subjects to have to talk about, but there is an expertise required to look at how we can improve workplace culture. How can we make your workplace a nicer, kinder, more productive place? Dr. Donna comes out of a corporate background, but she's currently working in this field. And Donna, so good to have you on the program with me.
Thank you very much.
It is a terrible subject, isn't it? Really, in a lot of respects. So we even have to tackle this. And the fact that you've become an expert in this field really tells us that we've got some problems out there.
Well, it's interesting because when I started looking at this space and started going, okay, where are the gaps and overlaps and what can be done to resolve it? There were several times that I came to a wall and I went, maybe the problem isn't as big as I think it is. I'm just trying to make, a mountain out of a molehill effectively. And so I would turn to someone that's standing next to me at Warner Fitness, for example. I asked the person next to me on a flight. I asked the person next to me, and no matter who I asked, they all had a story. Well, this happened and this happened and this happened. And the one at the Warren Fitness was quite interesting because she was a nurse. She had left to practice because of bullying, because they had brought in someone who effectively, and so there was a high turnover till eventually she was the last person standing. And after even a word that letting the practice owners know what was going on, she finally resigned out of that. Then I was in Auckland doing a presentation in a PHO, and the chief director went, I think I know what clinic you're talking about. Now, the clinic I had talked to was a Tauranga clinic, yet he's now correlating the same kind of response for an Auckland clinic.
Yeah, isn't that interesting? And it does seem like those stories are everywhere. And you're right, when you do ask those casual questions, you better be prepared for an answer. I mean, I was having a conversation yesterday about someone who attended an educational full-day workshop, and we were talking about one of the leaders who was running that workshop, and she said, I work with one of their former colleagues, and this leader has a habit of quote unquote destroying people.
Yeah.
I mean, that's heavy language, right? I mean, but there are people sitting in positions of authority who, to give them some grace, I would say, have never received the right training to lead people. And I think that's evident in a number of industries. Certainly within the medical field, there are people who are outstanding experts in their medical skills, but have never been given the opportunity to learn as leaders and understand people. Is that something that you're aware of, or you would agree with, that a lot of people are just not trained?
I would definitely agree people aren't trained. And if they are, they might have gone to a workshop. Even early in my career, when I was involved with the workforce development responsibilities, we put together what we identified there's high turnover in the organization I was in. And we needed to fix that because we were able to put management into a quadrant of 4, performing, not performing, stressed staff, non-stressed staff, or engaged staff. But we looked at the top 2 and we said, if we've got engaged staff here and disengaged staff here with higher turnover, what are the differences between the 2 management styles? The result of that, we developed a week of training to train these managers. Going through that process over the next year, we're doing the next intake. And I got a question when I was interviewing a young man, and he says, has my manager been through this? I said, well, actually, yes, he went through it on these dates. Well, it doesn't show.
Wow.
So you kind of like, that started me looking at, that was the beginning of my investigating systems and structures and saying what other things have to be in place. But it also changed the way we did the training. Instead of putting them in a week of training, we did a half-day training every 2 weeks. and we looked for them to practice things. So we gave them, here's a concept, here's ways to implement it, and gave them things, and then looked for feedback within the team. So we measured things quite differently. And over the course then of 6 to 8 months of going through that, we saw behavior trades. And I knew we got a winner when at a Christmas party, one of the wives says, I don't know what you've been doing, but your classes have been successful. My husband listens to me now.
Well, there you go. That's evidence for itself.
That was
Isn't it
hardcore
interesting?
evidence. We were doing something right then.
I've worked with some large
Say.
organizations that have had this workshop mentality. And I mean, I deliver workshops on certain subjects, so I don't think it's a terrible thing. But I think when it comes to systematic change of behavior, yes, it's an incremental over time thing. But we have, well, I've experienced in some large organizations them doing things I personally believe are completely wrong. Unconscious bias training. I mean, a whole bunch of things which really are not getting to the nub of the issue, which is what leaders believe about people. Yeah, I mean, this is one of my kind of really strong belief systems myself. Is what a leader believes about people is the way they're going to treat them. Behavior follows belief.
Yeah.
So I want to ask you a couple of
Can
things.
I add to that a little bit before
Yeah, please do.
There's another thing to it. You also have to have leaders that, because a lot of these particular managers didn't think they were doing anything wrong. They thought, I'm getting bonused, I'm being rewarded, so I'm doing something right. And it wasn't until we made a system change and they came in and complained about the system change because it was affecting them. But that's what I was talking, when you talk about the performance framework that they're measured against, if that's misaligned with the behaviors you're expecting out of them, it'll create that conflict and they will see no need to change.
Yeah, that's interesting. And of course, that opens up the whole question about measurement. And it's interesting when you talked before about turnover. Staff turnover is often an early warning sign. It's definitely a warning sign, which is evident outside of an organization that things are not well if people keep leaving. But of course, again, you've got to have people within the leadership structure who actually care about the fact that people are being, dare I say, used up. And that's what's happening, isn't it? People's careers, people's lives are being used up through poor leadership. Tell me about, measurement matters, right? The way that we measure actually matters. So you've talked about a couple of things there about measurements. How do you go about measuring these kinds of things within an organization?
I start with the employee. Most organizations will do an employee survey, but they leave them as a little cluster or a line item thing that's not inactionable. They don't necessarily map the relationships between them. So, for example, what's the relationship between satisfaction, motivation, and commitment? And how does that relationship impact human capital? There's a relationship between that. There's a relationship between opportunities within the organization to that. So we'll take existing data, but we currently do that through our organizational assessment. And when you sit back and you see the relationships between things, then you can see how you can influence them. And you understand what are the levers underneath those particular items that you can tweak to actually get a better outcome. But the biggest thing is to start with those relationships, because understanding that. Financial statements is typically what's used for measurement, or there's a list of HR measurements, turnover being one of them. But turnover is an outcome. It's not the root cause. So you're looking at the relationship. If you understand the relationship, motivation, satisfaction, commitment, and how value alignment goes with a particular manager, then you can say, oh, there's behaviors here that are affecting this, which is creating the turnover.
It seems like you have to have a fairly strong commitment from a senior leadership position to entertain some of the things that you're talking about. You have to acknowledge, it's a bit like the 12-step alcoholic problem, right? Your first step is to acknowledge that we have a problem. In your experience, are organizations prepared to go, we've got a turnover problem, so there must be a relational issue. There must be issues which are related further down through the structure. Do you find people are open to that conversation?
I think there's two conversations that happen. There's the one conversation that goes, oh, that's no big deal, or it's manageable, we'll just do this. So they'll do a quick fix. And then there's another conversation where they'll go, we don't really understand this. Why is this happening? And it's the ones that are saying, why is this happening, to do it. Now, if you want to improve an organizational's performance, and that is on the profit and loss statement or on the market expectations, whatever those performances are, you've got a key antecedent of human capital. People want to know that, but I think the bigger problem is because they can't see it in their current environment or their current knowledge base, they don't know what they're looking for. And I think it has a lot more to do with blindness of not knowing what they don't know than it has to do with actually making choices to negatively impact people. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. And
My
it's,
whole career has been about making something that's invisible visible, because once you make it visible, then I watch people just go, oh, I love this. Now I can see what I can do with it.
yes.
And now I can act different. So as soon as they're able to see something, they get really excited. And that's what happened with those managers years ago is once the ones that had the high turnover were able to see what a difference this would make for them, not just for the business performance, and they're working in aligned with the business goals instead of their own agendas, which is, i.e., get my biggest bonus I can, then you watch the shift happen in people. And that's a beautiful thing to watch when they couldn't see or couldn't understand things because they're beyond their knowledge base, to be able to see that and see something visible, go, now I can see what I can do.
And I do like, I mean, one of the statements that I really value when a client says this to me is when they say, I don't know what to do. When someone says that to me, I know we're in a great space, right? Because it means that they are open, they're inquisitive, that they want to be what I describe as a lifelong learner. They want to know how to fix their situations. And for me, that's a very strong point of acknowledging they don't want to, they don't know what to do.
It's terrifying to admit it too.
No, absolutely.
Terrifying.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we know there are cultures within leadership, cultures within organizations where acknowledging mistakes, faults, what I describe as thinness at times. I'll often say to leaders, tell me where you feel a bit thin. And based on the answer they give me, really tells me a huge amount about that particular person and their self-awareness and their ability. But yeah, there isn't a great culture, I don't think, for us to go, yeah, I'm struggling with this, and not to feel like you're going to be laughed at or put down or whatever. And of course, the higher up the structure you sit, if you're a senior leader saying, I'm not quite sure what to do about this, that's devastating for a lot of people, I think.
I think it's the way business has been built. My observation now that I'm getting data on particular incidents and insights to things is organizations morph and they don't do it strategically. So for example, an organization will say, okay, we've done a job analysis, we need to add a new body in here. And they go recruit, but oftentimes it's unclear exactly what the role is, and it's so close to other roles that it sets up a competition unknowingly often. So you throw another body to get better outcomes. And when it doesn't get an outcome, it just kind of morphs rather than strategically looking at things. Where's the risk base from the bottom? Where's the strategy from the top? And then how do we make sure there's a map in these so that within the system, there's checks and balances. And when you can do it with the checks and balances, you can get rid of the threats and the pockets of power or fiefdoms that start to evolve in organizations to protect their positional power, which creates the inability to say, I don't know.
Interesting you use the word fiefdoms. I mean, what a fascinating word that is. I mean, but this plays into, I think, another phrase that you use, which is organizational justice. Can you explain what you mean by organizational justice?
When I'm talking about organizational justice, I'm looking at procedural, distributive, and interactional. Are the processes fair? That any process is fair, process fair on allocation of resources. So if you talk about, here's my measurement that I'm being measured on for my performance, am I being allocated the right resources to be able to do that? Whether they're financial, physical, people, resources. Do I have those resources to do that? Distributive, you're starting to look at outcome fairnesses. Am I being given all the information I need to make informed decisions in the organization? Because often we find people aren't being included into conversations they need to be able to make those informed decisions. So you can measure those within the organization. Are they getting those things? And you look at behaviors to do that. Interactional, so interpersonal or informational interactions within the organization.
Yeah, that's interesting. When it comes to resource and allocation of resources, I find that almost on a daily basis having conversations around similar things, and employees who a conclusion I've come to, which is one of the simplest conclusions about what people want, is I've done a lot of research about what people want in their workplace. What is it they actually need? What do they want? And one of the simplest but greatest statements that I hear is, just let me do my job. I just want to be able to do a good job. And the frustration that sits behind that statement is they know that I don't have access to this resource. And it's kind of like, I don't understand why they don't do something about that. And I think this plays out all the time. I think it plays out in the protests that we're seeing with people going on strike. I have this belief that a lot of strikes are not about, a lot of protests are not about fiscal reward. It's about fix my systems so I can do my job and the satisfaction. And again, I don't understand why senior leaders don't get this. Or maybe worse, they do get it and they're just simply saying, I don't care what you want. The answer's not.
I want to think more positive of people. I think most of the time it's a blindness. I use two triangles, one upside down and one right side up. And the upside down one is, at the top of it is vision of, or 100% knowledge of vision. So it's the reality of the vision. What are you trying to do? At the anchor of the other one is vision of reality. The higher you up in the organization, the more strong or higher percentage you understand the vision that you're trying to achieve. The further down you are, you have a stronger understanding of reality. And the communication lines that go between them don't always make it between the through. And the biggest reason is KPIs are top rolled down. There's no risk assessment from bottom up. So you can't link what someone at the front lines goals and objectives are to that vision. And because they don't have that line of sight, there's that confusion. And then you get, I hate to bang on about middle management, but sometimes middle management gets caught in the, I don't know what to do. And they tend to hold the information so it doesn't get passed up or down. So the visibility isn't there within that.
I think that's absolutely right. I've seen your inverted pyramid, inverted triangle model, and I think it's brilliant because, I talk to people who have an understanding of the reality of what life is like at the bottom end, and again that frustration of why don't people understand it from the top, and often I think it is not necessarily picking on middle managers, but often vision stops in the middle. If it's not communicated clearly and transferred through the organization, you often find it is middle leaders who have not had it clearly explained to them, or there's an assumption they understand it. But if they don't understand it, how on earth can they communicate that to their staff and to their teams?
And sometimes middle management thinks they're often doing the right thing in that they're protecting their staff below them from the powers that be above them. Or they're given the information that the upper management demands and requires without understanding the implications of that. So it happens from both sides. It's just they kind of get stuck in the middle.
Yeah, I mean, one of my little mantras is that great leadership and great communication are synonymous terms. Very hard to be a great leader if you're a poor communicator. In fact, almost impossible, I think, in this day and age. Given all our tools and that, you'd think we'd be brilliant communicators, but we're still struggling. George Bernard Shaw said this, and I love it. He said that the single biggest issue in communication is the illusion it has taken place at all. And I think that's really, really appropriate. I wanted to ask you about exit interviews, whether you've had experience over that, because it seems to me that when people have finally had enough and they walk out the door, and there's just huge amounts of research on the cost of that. If someone in a middle leadership position walks out the door, there's a huge cost associated with that. But I'm wondering whether the idea of exit interviews and actually gaining valuable change-based information is a commonplace from your experience.
Are you asking me if people, when they're exiting, actually are honest about why they're exiting?
Well,
No,
that
they're not.
is, yeah, no, that's, yeah,
I can,
which is
out
critical,
of,
right? Because, yeah, they've got into the position of leaving because people haven't been honest, and if they're not honest when they leave, then it's,
no, the easy answer is I'm going to get more pay. But that's because it's an easy answer.
yeah,
It's that's not the root cause though. And unless you're looking at and measuring for what the root causes are in there, you're not actually going to identify. You know, when the experience that I told you when we developed that whole management program, that started with I was doing some exit interviews because, you know, I was in an organization, 130,000 employees globally. And in a tech field, we couldn't hire them fast enough for contracts that we were signing and we needed the bodies for because we were losing them faster. And one of the exit interviews, well, it was easier to find a new job outside than inside. Wait a second. We're a global company. It was easier for you to find. That was probably the most honest answer. And that started, you know, that you're going, okay, why is that? And so you start looking at the process and procedures around that, and you can identify, oh, it's this. And what it was in our system is when you were looking for another internal role, you actually had to go ask your manager for permission to apply for a role someone else because it wasn't transparent on who was hiring. So
wow.
I had to go make an argument to the executive team of why I needed that procedure changed.
Well, that plays into your statement about organisational justice, doesn't it? I mean, if I have to come and ask someone who I'm not getting on well with that I want to get out of their team, man, that is really an imbalance of power in that
Yeah,
situation.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah. If I'm sitting on a board of governance for an organisation, whether it's a not-for-profit or whether it's a corporate organisation, and I'm seeing that staff turnover or the costs associated with rehire is starting to climb, um, I want to know what is going on, and it does require some honesty from senior leadership when that is happening. But if that is not happening, and I'm kind of leading up to a question about Workright 23, you have created a platform where we can start to gather data to identify what's going on or going wrong in organizations. Can you tell me about that?
Well, part of it was to answer the question you're at. How do you get that visibility across the organization? Because I think a lot of information is withheld because people are fearful. And you can't overcome that fear with just going in and talking about fear. You can't rebuild that trust because it's embedded into the way you do things. We Going back to where I did my doctorate work, we started doing assessments on the intangibles. So if you have your profit and loss statement, there are intangibles that go with it. So if you look at a public held company, maybe in a high intensive capital company, 20% of the value is within their profit and loss in their balance sheet. The other 80% is intangibles. So when I designed Workright 23, I put part of that is we can do an organizational assessment and we can look at then the relationships between human capital, structural capital, the process and procedures, how you do things in the organization, because human capital will create that structural capital. We look at the external capital, the relationship with your market vendor suppliers, communities that you're working in, because that's where your marketing dollars are spent. If you spend a lot in your marketing dollars, but your human capital, it has a perception publicly that it's you're not a great place to work. It doesn't matter what you spend market wise, you're
Yeah.
not going to retain that, nor are you going to be able to attract the best and the brightest to your workforce. So we do that organizational assessment and we look at the relationships and the strength of relationships between things. And then we break those down into several reports that can actually get to the root cause of what's going on and not just the surface easy answer that is often said.
It's interesting. Just one thing you've said there, I try and minimize and reduce some of these concepts so people can grasp them easily. And I've had a conversation on several occasions about how do we determine what our culture is. And I think it's an interesting point that you've made about regardless of the marketing dollars, actually what the collective conversation is about your organization determines the culture. It's what people say it is, right? Even if it's a not 100% accurate, it's the perception of what people believe about your organization is the culture you have, right? It's very powerful. So tell me a bit more about Workright 23. So you've got these tools. to help assess some of these really critical issues within an organisation.
Mm.
But how does it work when it comes to identifying poor behaviour? Because again, if we stick to a sort of leadership top-down kind of approach to using software and tools, they can be honest or dishonest in the way they answer or deal with those. What happens if you're an employee sitting in a team and you're experiencing poor behaviour by line managers or by departmental heads and so forth? How does your software, how does your program help in that regard?
Well, there are two things going. There's a number of components on the platform. There's a knowledge base on how to use it, what is or is not disruptive behaviors in the workforce. I hate to say just workplace bullying because I'm starting to move away from just that term, because I think workplace bullying is one particular type of bullying, but it isn't what's necessary, because a toxic work environment won't necessarily be workplace bullying, but it is a toxic work environment, and that has a different line. But I measure everything. So there is the organizational assessment, but we also open up to let people that are experiencing bullying behaviors, they can do a questionnaire that tells them what the risk is of being bullied within that environment. What's that percentage? If they do, then like if they score high on that, then they open a case. So you can document a current case, a past case, or a domestic violence case at work now, and it's run by case management. So you open a case, you give some basic background, and then you can record incidences as they happen. And what we do in the background of that is we look at those incidents and we can measure the intensity and the frequency over time, which comes out to a graph of those incidences, which will indicate which type of bullying is going on. Now, from an organizational view, you have the perceptual instruments you have with surveys, but then we have actual incident data. So we can actually look at the perception and the actual, so both qualitative and quantitative, and kind of map those together and get to a real root cause within an organization view. From the individual side, having that support and outside and independent of the organization means that they can actually get a resolution rather than just an outcome. So we look at resolving things and supporting them, resolving them. Now, we do that on an individual basis as a charity for no charge, but we are funded through partnerships with organizations. And if it's in an organization, then we really work to make sure that we've got a resolution and that things go forward within an organization that goes well.
The resolution issue, I think, is really, really important. I've often said to people, when there's a personal grievance, there are no winners. Someone might get a check, but there are absolutely
The only winners are the lawyers.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. Because if you take a personal grievance, if you work in a place which you're passionate about, you love your work, but there's a situation which is causing you psychological harm, or worse, even if you get a check, you've lost in that situation. Right? I mean, it's uncomfortable to continue.
You can't. Or if you see something that's gone wrong and you're a whistleblower, it's the same thing. That there is so much that falls down on an individual. And what I wanted in order to resolve this, what I decided is you have to have a safe place for people to report things. And what we've done on the platform is they can go open a case, and they can have several cases open, but they record it and they're in control of that we don't go tell them this is what they need to do. We say, here's all the options, but you've got to have, and that's part of that organizational justice. And it's, I don't want to say it's a workaround. It's with organizations that we work with, it's in partnership with them to make sure that the procedural is happened, the distributive, the interactional, particularly the procedural and interactional when you're dealing with conflict, because the goal is to resolve it and get them working back together for the benefit of the organization and all parties involved, rather than just going down a legal action and saying, well, we're going to part ways. The legislation, Employment Legislation 2000, is a great piece of legislation. And for the first 10 years, worked really well on getting people back to work. In the last 10 years, it's kind of been skewed into something that is, oh, you have a disagreement, you're out of here. And you end up parting ways, which just destroys people, but also gives probably, in a number of cases, unearned reputations to organizations too. Or an organization's penalized for something that they haven't done. So it works both ways. And what I want is, let's get down to the actually outcomes and the root causes and resolve them so that we don't keep tripping over the same thing.
One of the benefits that I see from what you're talking about, and I love what you've done, because it's obviously taken some thinking and it's got such broad scope, which is wonderful. But it seems to me that if you're someone who is experiencing some untoward behavior, and the fear, the palpable fear of being able to report that to someone, which often prevents people from reporting that. Now they've got an opportunity. They can log on to a computer, they can log on to a website, they can actually enter information, time, date, and events, I think. And do I make the assumption correctly that has legal gravitas to it, that information can be used as an evidence in a court case?
There's a couple things, and there's a lot of thought going in the process behind. There's a couple things that go on. One, everything is date and time stamped, so that if you're going in and you're looking on the balance of probabilities, well, you've got the records, and they can go back for a long time. Two, it leaves the decision in the hands of the target. So when they're ready, then they can decide what they want to do. But we also explain all their options, pros and cons, because not even lawyers explain all the options that you have. And legal options aren't the only things you can do within that space. There are a lot of other things that we have. The biggest advantage for me personally about this approach is for targets to be able to document things, and that reflective process that goes on. One, by documenting, they can get past the trauma of that particular event. So it's down, it's documented, that gives that little bit of peace of mind, but also knowing that it's somewhere safe and they don't have to do anything with it right now, that allows them to get away from that emotion, separate emotionally, so they can start thinking about what it is. And that does two things. They can assess their contributions to it, and can look at how they might approach things differently. And they can look at the events and say, are they serious enough? And I don't think enough of that reflection has happened. I think we tend to react emotionally to things without thinking through all that, and if there's other options that could be done. We've had cases where an option coach, I should say, we have option coaches that work with them too. Again, not telling them what to do, but we'll go to meetings with the target and even the employer, and having that objectional third party just make a couple comments. Oh, we didn't realize that we were that we're talking the same things, but we're talking opposite, which has created the conflict.
Can I just say something here, which I think it's kind of throwaway maybe, but I think it's brilliant. You're talking about the target as opposed to a victim, and boy, that for me that makes such a major difference in the conversation. Someone is a target of someone's unkind behavior. That doesn't make them a victim, because the victimhood has just a whole bunch of other stuff going on around it, I think. So I love that. I mean, it's simple, but I love that choice of language, that someone is a target.
That was a very conscious decision on our part in the naming. A victim is helpless, and we want to enable it. We want to empower the target to make informed decisions. And a lot of time in the process of procedures that happen around us, we're reacting and not making informed decisions. And informed decisions mean you step back into your own power.
And it's interesting because the list of people who are likely to be targeted include actually high performers. It's not just people who we would think are useless, not useless, but helpless victims. It is people who are high performers sometimes, and very creative and very unique people. So I think that's brilliant. Look, there's just so much that we can talk about. I'm going to ask you to come back again and talk to me some more. But it just seems to me that there's a little trick in what you're presenting through Workright and the software, is that when you have a databases start to flag repetitive things. So repetitive within a single organization, but can I also assume that you could flag behavior across a movement of people across different organizations?
Are you talking particularly about the matching mechanism right now? Because we don't talk a lot about that.
Oh, okay. Well, I can edit that part out.
Well, there's two parts there. There's two parts to watching in this. We have up over 80,000 individual incidences now. which is a lot of data that we can look at about types of behaviors. And that's starting to tell us about the types of things that are happening across New Zealand, for example.
Sorry, can I just interrupt you? Can you quantify that? You're saying 80,000 incidents within New Zealand
Yeah.
in a relatively short period of time since you've been doing this.
In just about 2 years.
Wow.
So that tells us a lot, and do an analysis on that or research looking in that, you can start to see, oh, well, these are trends. So we're in the process of doing the quantitative research on a lot of that data now. You can do it at an organizational level, you can do it at a community or regional level, and we can do it at a national level, which is exciting because part of the reason that I designed Workright 23 and the platform the way I did is I knew that data is information, and information that leads to knowledge. And that transition, data, information, knowledge, and wisdom, means that we can actually make smarter decisions in the future with having that. And part of the reason that, going back to the conversation, organizations are blind in they don't know, and they don't know how to. And I wanted to solve that blindness, so we can start publishing reports on that. But the second part of it is, we have a matching escrow in the system that if there is a serial perpetrator, for example, particularly in the sexual harassment space is where we see it, that serial perpetrator, before he's actually disciplined or punished, can actually move to another organization. And when our targets identify that perpetrator, the system will match it. And the system then notifies a lawyer, who we call an options advocate, who does pro bono work with us, and they will inform the targets that their perpetrator has been matched by another target. So it's no longer a he said, she said argument. We can actually document that. And when they have cases and evidence, that's documented. So we've had a match between a domestic violence case and a sexual harassment case, where the lawyer was able to work with both parties. The parties never had to meet each other, the targets didn't, but evidence from one was used to support the other one, both in family court and in the sexual harassment investigation. So it was no longer a he said, she said argument there.
Man, that makes this a very, very powerful tool. And a very valuable tool. Donna, the end of the conversation is about making organizations better, more productive, more innovative, more friendly, more kind, better places to work. And again, I think what you've said in terms of we get data, we get knowledge, and we get information that leads to knowledge, and knowledge leads to positive change. Dr. Donna Stemmer is the founder of Workright 23. Thank you so much. This is a very important conversation, and we're going to continue it into some other parts as well. There's lots more to talk about, and including some of your own testimony about some of your experiences and why you've ended up as the founder of this organization. I think this powerful testimony to be discussed. So we'll get our tissues ready for that one. But I really appreciate it. Dr. Donna Stemmer is a professional expert in this field, founder of Workright 23. And people can look you up simply through LinkedIn, or can go to workright23.com. Would that be right?
We have both .org.nz, which is a charity based in New Zealand, but we've also now established .com because we've already opened up into Australia, which we're surprised about the uptake already there, because it's jurisdictional specific, but you can go to .com and get to either one, but just search Workright 23, you'll find us.
Well, thank you so much for not only talking to me, but thank you so much for the work that you're doing. It's vitally important, and I think senior leaders need to really sit and to listen to what you've said and to reach out. I think it's valuable for all of us. So, Donna, thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Can you hear me now?